One of the main themes of David Fincher's series Mindhunter is the formation of the concept of the serial killer in criminal practice in the late 1970s. At that time, FBI agents noticed similar circumstances in some murders, the same victim profile, and recurring details. Back then, people couldn't comprehend that a criminal might attack not for money or out of personal hatred, but simply because they felt an irresistible desire to kill and torture. A few years later, the United States was swept by media hysteria over serial killers. They became celebrities on par with musicians or movie stars, and this morbid interest in them was accompanied by panic and shifts in public consciousness. Today, the situation has changed again. Serial killers are no longer in the spotlight. According to researchers' estimates, the average number of such criminals over the last decade is 43 active subjects per year. For comparison, in 1989, there were 193 active maniacs operating simultaneously in the United States. Of course, the gradual disappearance of serial killings is good news for humanity. But have monsters like Ted Bundy or Andrei Chikatilo really become a thing of the past? And who has replaced them? According to the definition on the FBI website, serial murder is the killing of 3 or more people in events taking place at different times, which have similar characteristics, suggesting they were committed by the same individual or group. The question of the nature and formation of the psychology of such criminals remains open. However, there is statistical data on how their numbers have changed over the last 60 years. In the 1960s, 19 murderers later labeled as serial were caught. In the 70s, 119, and in the 80s, 200. In the 90s, 141, and in the 2000s, only 61. Criminology and behavioral analysis specialists point to several reasons for the surge in serial killings in the 1980s. One factor is considered to be the sexual revolution and more general changes in the perception of once taboo topics. Scenes of violence and sex in movies and popular true crime magazines of the time became normalized, and access to such content was significantly easier compared to the first post-war decades. The more active lifestyle of young people, especially women, who traveled more often without a steady partner and hitchhiked, is considered another factor that turned potential victims into easy prey for killers. Another motivating factor for serial killers could have been the fame their ilk received. Media that exploited themes of cruelty and violent crimes further inflamed the imaginations of people who grew up in troubled environments. According to Canadian expert Peter Vronsky, one important factor in the rise of serial killings in the 1970s and 1980s was the high percentage of children raised in fatherless families or with fathers who had suffered psychological trauma from World War II. This version is supported by the rise in serial killings between 1935 and 1950. The generation of children of World War I veterans was also predisposed to violent crimes. In the early 1980s, the police had almost no means of catching maniacs. The method of creating a psychological profile did not guarantee success, and the disparate state databases made exchanging evidence on individual cases nearly impossible. Criminals took advantage of this. For example, Ted Bundy, infamous for killing 30 girls and escaping from prison twice, operated in 6 states from Washington to Florida, using highways and the convoluted system of information sharing between departments. A breakthrough in investigating serial killings was the method of genetic fingerprinting, or DNA comparison, discovered by British geneticist Alec Jeffreys in 1984. In the 1990s, this method began to be widely used to establish links between unsolved cases and search for suspects. In 1997, saliva and hair samples taken from a suspect in the murders of several dozen women in Washington state were matched with biological evidence from the crime scenes. The match led to the arrest of truck driver Gary Ridgway, who became known as the Green River Killer and received 48 life sentences. Another example of the masterful use of DNA to catch serial killers is the case of the Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo. By confirmed accounts, he killed 10 people from 1979 to 1986 and sexually assaulted several dozen more people around the same time. The criminal's identity remained unknown until 2018, when investigators created an account on the popular genealogical website GDmatch and uploaded a sample from one of the murder scenes. The results pointed to several distant relatives of the maniac. Genealogy expert and former lawyer Barbara Ray Venter helped detectives build a family tree based on the results, and using the genetic data, created a profile of a blue-eyed, balding criminal. Among the possible suspects based on DNA comparison, one was found who fit all the criteria. 72-year-old retired military officer and former policeman Joseph DeAngelo, who had been arrested before for theft. The progress in investigative methods has clearly impacted the reduction of serial killings. We are arresting fewer serial killers, and when we do, their victim count is much shorter than that of their predecessors, notes Vronsky. The development of digital technology also prevents serial killers from staying in the shadows as they used to. There are many more cameras on the streets today, the footage from which the police can seize if necessary, explained former FBI agent and profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. The ability to locate a subscriber during a phone call allows investigators to reconstruct a suspect's movements and build a more convincing body of evidence. The attitude of potential victims towards strangers has also changed. In 2020, mothers are less likely to let their children play alone than in the 1980s, and hitchhikers no longer travel alone and journey in groups. What once seemed natural now arouses suspicion after decades of fear and murders. According to another version, serial killers disappeared not because of improved capture methods and people's suspicion, but because they simply lost their motivation. Most maniacs are obsessed not only with killing, but also with fame. And serial killings in the 1980s turned out to be an easy way to achieve national notoriety. But at the turn of the millennium, media priorities changed, and serial killers were replaced by mass murderers. Journalist Christopher Beam cites the example of British serial killer Stephen Griffiths, who, for the sake of attention, chose a crossbow as his murder weapon and claimed to have eaten his victims raw, but only received a short one-paragraph news item in the New York Times. We occasionally hear about another Beltway sniper or a grim sleeper who terrorizes a community, but none of the serial killers of recent decades have become entrenched in pop culture like the monsters of the 1970s and 1980s. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and Jeffrey Dahmer. Bundy participated in Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign and represented the dark underbelly of America's shiny facade. Gacy was a real nightmare for parents. He dressed as a clown and hunted teenagers. Perhaps serial killers have lost their relevance, so fame-hungry psychopaths are achieving recognition in new ways. Vronsky's theory that the number of serial killers increases after major disasters and upheavals suggests that a new generation of psychopaths could emerge in the world in about 10 years. The researcher links the next peak in serial killer activity to the 2008 economic crisis. This mechanism works the same way as in the 1930s, when war and the Great Depression caused a rise in crime. Many children lost their homes. Families fell apart due to economic problems. Serial killers appear during specific periods characterized by personal trauma and a crisis of the family. An even more pessimistic interpretation suggests that serial killers haven't gone anywhere. They are just caught less often. The FBI claims that serial killers are responsible for less than 1% of crimes. The number of serial killers declined simultaneously with a decrease in the clearance rate. In 1965, 91% of homicides in the U.S. were cleared, while in 2017, it was 61.6%. In other words, about 40% of killers remain at large. It's quite possible that maniacs have adapted, taking into account progress in DNA research, the large number of cameras, and potential digital footprints. This assumption seems only partly convincing. Serial killers rarely possess outstanding intellect and are almost never the geniuses they are portrayed as in popular culture. According to data from Radford University's Serial Killer Information Center, the average IQ of serial killers is 94.5. The average person's IQ ranges from 95 to 105. It's unlikely that some people's thirst for violence has disappeared over the past half-century. It has either taken other forms or is less often going unpunished due to more sophisticated forms of control. However, it is impossible to state with 100% certainty the exact statistical indicators regarding the increase or decrease in the number of serial killers. We can only reliably discuss the criminals who have been caught.